So this is a bit of a different video than I normally make. Typically I make statistics videos, but now I wanted to make a programming video. And I specifically wanted to show how to deal with structs in C and Python. So this is integrating the C programming language with Python and how to use structs because they can be kind of confusing. And not only that, but also strings as well, because strings can also be a little confusing. And so I have IPython, Interactive Python, and I created an example wrapper which wraps some of my C code. And then I just have a struct called person, so we can create myself. We have to pass a byte string, so that's what this B prefix is. This means that this is a byte string, and so right now it's not encoded into anything. And we can pass the age, and then we can have two functions which are written in C. We can get the name of the person, which returns Zach, and then we can get the age of the person. And then even though this get name is written in C, we can, since this returns a Python string, we could call the typical Python functions like split. Whoops, that's the wrong function. And there, now the string was split. So I could show all of the code, but I think it'll be a bit easier to understand if we kind of just start over completely from the ground up. So I have a handful of files here, but I'm going to remove all of them, except PyCache, I guess. Whoops, I'm still in IPython. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the C code first. So let's just create, I just called these examples. So let's do example.h, which is our header file. And we will create the header guards. And then we will create a struct, which has a name as a pointer to characters, and then an age, which is an integer. And we will call this person. And then I'll implement the exact two functions I just had. So we'll have a getName function, which returns a pointer to characters. And this takes a constant pointer to a person. And then likewise, we will have a integer function, getAge, also taking a constant pointer to a person, and that's pretty much our header file. So we created a struct which contains a name and an age, and then we declare two functions to get the name and then get the age. So implementing these is very straightforward. So let's go ahead and include our example.h header, and we will first implement the getName function. Whoops, not pointer, it's person. And this will be, we will just return the name, pretty simple. And then likewise, get age. I keep wanting to write pointer for some reason. Oh, this is supposed to be p name, my bad. P age. And that's pretty much it. That's the implementation. So now the C programming portion is done. We have a struct, which contains a name and age, and then we have two methods to extract the name and extract the age. So now all we have to do is compile this into a shared library, which you can see I already, I have this from when I was doing this earlier. So I'm using C99, although it doesn't really matter. We pass in our C file, and the most important flag is this shared flag, which indicates that we are compiling into a shared library. and then the -o for the output, and we name our output, which I'm using libexample.so, and the so is for shared object or shared library. So this is for Linux. I'm on Manjaro Linux. I imagine this should work for Mac, although there might be some slight differences. It should also work for Windows. However, I don't think Windows supports SO files, so you might need to figure out how to compile it into a DLL, dynamic linked library. However, I don't really program on Windows, and so I can't really help much. So this will be for mainly Linux and potentially Mac as well. So after compiling, now you can see that we have these are our two source files, and then we have the shared object library, and this is what we're going to be using in Python. So now we can actually create our Python wrapper to wrap our C functions into Python code. And so previously I called this example wrapper, so that's what we'll create. And all we need to do is we can import everything from ctypes, which is built into the standard library, by the way, so we don't need to pip install anything. Ctypes comes with Python, which is very convenient. And in order to work with structs, you kind of have to create a Python class, which essentially wraps the struct within a Python class. So we will create a class called person, and this takes a structure, and this structure is from ctypes. And so, this is essentially like ctypes.structure. However, since we're importing everything, we don't need to write ctypes. And then we have to define the fields of the struct. And so we had the name field, and this is a character pointer, so we have to write c char p, which this indicates a character pointer. And then we had age, and this is an integer, so we just write c int. And that's pretty much it. That's all we have to do. We just have to essentially write or wrap our struct inside of a class, Python class. So now we can get the library. So we'll call this lib example, and then we can use cdll, which is also from ctypes, and we will look at the current directory and pull out libexample.so, which is what we compiled just a minute ago. So now from here we can actually create our wrapper functions. So I will use getName, which will take a person, so I'll just do p there. And then what we could do is we can return, and now we can reference our compiled code, libexample, and now this will actually call the C function. So this getName here is actually calling the C function and not this function. So now we're referencing the actual C code. Actually, before we do that, since getName in our C code takes a pointer to a struct, right now we just have a struct, so we actually need to create a pointer to it. So I'm just going to say p pointer, and then we have pointer, which is also from ctypes, and we can just call pointer on p. So now we've created a pointer to the struct person, and then we can pass that pointer. And one last thing, since we're dealing with strings, which are a little tricky, if you were to just leave it as is, if you were to call this function in Python, you would just see random numbers because it's a byte string. So in order to get a sensible string in Python, we have to decode the byte string. And I will just use ASCII, but of course you should use any decoding that makes sense for whatever you're doing. And so that's pretty much it for the getName. get age will be extremely similar. We create another pointer to our struct. So we'll create p pointer, and we will create a pointer to our p, which indicates our person structure. And then we will return libexample.getAge, which is our getAge function within C, and we will pass the pointer. And we don't have to do any decoding, obviously, because we're just returning an integer, not any bytes or anything. And this is pretty much it for the Python. So now, if we actually load up IPython, let me clear this real quick. So if we load up IPython again, and we can import everything from our example wrapper. Okay, I messed up some syntax. So this is supposed to have a colon. I guess that's one downside to using Vim. Alright, so let's try that again. We'll import example wrapper. Okay, no errors. So now let's try to create a person. Person equals person, and again we have to pass b because it's a byte string. Zach23, and then we will try get name person, and okay, that is a issue. libexample.getName. Oh, there's one other thing I forgot. If we go back to this, so for our functions, we can define the return types. And so if we call libexample and we say get name dot res type is the return type. And recall in our C code that we're returning the pointer to characters. And so the return type for this function is a character pointer. And then I'll also just do the same thing for getAge. getAge dot return type or res type. This returns an integer. And let me just separate that. Okay, so now that we've defined the return types, it should work properly this time. So now let's try this one last time. Hopefully no more mistakes. Person equals person. Zach23. Get name person. And there we go. We got the name and the get age, and we got 23. And we could also check the Python type just to be sure. So we can check the type of get name person, and it is a Python string. And then of course we can call the typical Python functions. So that's pretty much it. A somewhat quick-ish video on 3 things. A, how to integrate C code, compiled C code with Python code. B, how to use structs and pass pointers to functions, pointers to structs between Python and C. And then C, how to deal with strings, passing strings and returning strings between Python and C code. So I think these 3 things, personally I've had some struggles trying to understand all of them because the help I got online was kind of confusing and all over the place. So I kind of just wanted to make a quick summarized video of these 3 concepts, which I think will help you writing C code for Python modules. So hopefully that helps, and I'll see you whenever my next video is.